Netflix's quarterback show wasn't about the Vikings, but it was about a lot of things that might matter to Vikings fans. So let's talk about it. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to my hashtag everydayers. Those of you who listen to Locked On Vikings every single day, I appreciate you all so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today on the show, we're going to talk about Netflix's quarterback show, which did feature Kirk Cousins, but no Vikings. The Vikings only showed up twice in it, and I actually think that both of the times the Vikings did show up, we learned something that we didn't know before. And while it's like on the border of newsworthy to me, and I would have definitely cut it if anything else newsworthy was happening, that's not where we are here on July 9th. So, here's what I want to do. Let's revisit one of the more weirdly reported on things from last offseason, which was Kirk Cousins' departure from Minnesota. We've got some clarity there. Plus, we saw Kirk Cousins' return to Minnesota and the emotional kind of tone of that, which was also weirdly reported on. And then, if that's not that's all a little bit too wishy-washy, non-news for you, how about a look inside how the Lions smoked the Vikings, which we also got, and how what we learn from the show, I think for us fans, can help us contextualize exactly what's going to go down next time those two teams meet. But first, let's start with the Kirk Cousins stuff. So Kirk Cousins was one of the three quarterbacks on Netflix's quarterback show. The other two were Jared Goff, and as you could probably figure out, and Joe Burrow. I liked the season for whatever it's worth. I think it's, I don't know. I enjoyed myself. I think it's worth your time. But to start, the show begins with Kirk Cousins' kind of landing in Atlanta. And there's a little bit of like fish out of water stuff with him where he's like, a very Midwestern guy and he's trying to get to know the culture of Atlanta, and it's a little different. And that's all very cute. But what I guess kind of made my ears perk up was when he was talking about how the Achilles injury affected his free agency, which of course it did, right? That adds risk and people are going to be a little bit weirder about it. And also how, why he chose not to go to Minnesota. So one of the disputed things about Kirk Cousins' departure from Minnesota was who said no to who. By the way, I am currently out of town. I'm recording from my parents' place and visiting them. So the Wi-Fi is in and out. If I ever drop out or audio is weird, you're just gonna have to bear with me. I have some pre-recorded ones going up next week that are all hunky-dory, good to go, that you're going to be able to enjoy. But for now, we'll all get through it. And that's why it looks different too if you're watching. Anyways, so who said no to who? It's pretty clear that Kirk Cousins said no to the Vikings. That is the way that it goes down. But in a sense, the Vikings didn't offer Kirk Cousins what he wanted. He lays it out, and the way he describes it is that the Vikings wanted him on a year-to-year basis. A 1-year deal, or contracts that are functionally a 1-year deal, maybe a 3-year deal, but there's a bunch of options for cutting you or trading you in there. Without the guarantee structure that he necessarily wanted. It wasn't a long-term commitment in one way or another. And Atlanta did want a long-term commitment. There's a bunch of things about this that I think are really, really, really interesting. For one, the way that he talks about the conversations that are had, there is simply no way that they could have happened when they were supposed to happen. He talks about how, when me and my agent were out there and we were seeing what was out there, it was pretty clear that Atlanta was going to offer us a deal, and we went with that and all that. And it's very clearly a process that many conversations that happened before the actual official offer came. And Kirk Cousins, if I recall, signed on that very first day of the tampering period of the 2024 offseason. And those conversations cannot have happened, I think, on the time that like they were supposed to. The trip to Atlanta, I think like by that Wednesday, he was like doing press conferences and stuff. So it was a very compressed timeline, and that couldn't have happened. I only bring this up because there was like a real tampering case with the Falcons, and that is just, it's like further evidence in conjunction with that. But that doesn't interest me a whole lot because every team does that, and it's not really that big a deal. Everyone's going to do it, and if you want to start really enforcing it, you're going to change the way free agency works, which maybe you want that, but you probably want to be really deliberate about like deciding to enforce it more than you were before. The other part of this, so like the year-to-year nature of things makes a lot of sense. But if I recall, the reporting at the time was like kind of mixed. And I kind of get now, if that is the real truth, and I don't really see any reason for anybody to lie on this, a year after the fact. If the real truth is, okay, the Vikings had this offer, it was a little more temporary. Atlanta had an offer, it was more committed. So Kirk Cousins went with the more committed offer. That all makes a ton of sense. And if you look at if I recall the way that people were reporting on this in the, back in the time, like in the free agency windows and like around like combine time of the 2024 offseason, it was very like, the Vikings really want Kirk Cousins back. They all say, oh, they really want him back. They want him back. They want him back. They want him back. And I remember sort of cocking an eyebrow at that because, like, well, you're headed into this historic, QB class. There's going to be ultimately 6 guys that would go in the first round there. And that was even better than we thought. And we were already looking at it at this crazy class. You've got right around then you acquired an extra first round pick. So it was very clear the Vikings were going to be able to trade up and get something to happen if they wanted to. And it was just going to come down to what they thought about all these quarterbacks and how deep they really felt the class was. And then there's all this stuff about like, well, they're going to keep Kirk though. They're just going to roll it back and like roll with Kirk for 3 more years. And I remember thinking like, are they? The deal they signed in 2022 was very clearly meant to like peacefully expire. It wasn't meant to be restructured or renegotiated or traded or any of that stuff. It was just 2 reasonable years, and then he was going to go. And then we were at the end of that, and it felt like they had timed that up with when they felt some quarterbacks were going to come out. Like it felt very purposeful. So I thought, are they really going to do this? And so I kind of cocked an eyebrow at that. And now looking at it, it's like, okay, yeah, they did have an offer on the table, but it was temporary. And it was very clear that the Vikings really wanted a young quarterback. That's probably not news to anybody that they wanted a young quarterback in the room, but it is nice to have that kind of clarity, have that confirmed, and understand that now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can look at what the long-term plan of Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah was back in 22, 23, and last year, and how building a team that looked like this, right? Young quarterback you feel good about, surrounding cast that's completely insane. We were just talking yesterday, he has to be, a Madden 82 to be like a good quarterback, right? To have a good team. And building it like this way was like very, very purposeful. The vision is abundantly clear. And in those off seasons, the way it was written about was like very confused, right? It was, what's a competitive rebuild? What is Kwesi doing? We don't understand. Is he tanking? Is he all in? What's happening? And really, it was about targeting your QB switch, which happened in 2024, right? And saying, okay, we're gonna look at 24 as our year where we move from Kirk Cousins to the new rookie, and that turns into JJ McCarthy. And we're gonna kind of try to build the team up and sort of swap out all the old pieces for our own handpicked guys over like ship a thesis over a few years, and that's what we're going to do. And that all makes a whole bunch of sense, and it tracks with the Vikings saying, hey, Kirk, you can come be the Sam Darnold here, right? And they probably would have preferred Kirk to Sam Darnold, which turned out to have aged poorly, but you're going to have to take that contract. And my take was always that, like, I don't know if Cousins is going to want to do that If he can get more commitment from someone else, he's going to take that. And sure enough, that is what happened. But there wasn't bitterness or bad blood, which is another thing that is really easy, an easy trap to fall into, is to say, oh, you think he says what he really thinks finally of the Minnesota Vikings because he's off of them, and this bitter divorce. And there's a temptation to want to force that scenario because it's good for ratings. And it's just not the case at all. It was about commitment, right? And it was about the famous quote, it's about what the dollars represent. Well, the dollars represented commitment. That was what the mysterious missing link to that quote was. And it all kind of tracks now and the puzzle fits together, and we now know what happened. And I think it's pretty easy to come to peace with that because of how the season went for Kirk Cousins. And a big part of that was his return to Minnesota, where the game itself took a back seat in the documentary to something that I think the producers of the documentary made a good decision to really hone in on what they honed in on there. That will be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. It is America's #1 sportsbook. Hey, do you think the Vikings are going to have a winning record or a losing record next year? Over under 8.5. You can find that and so many more things at FanDuel. It is a great time to start thinking about your futures bets. If you're going to do any big season long stuff, here's what I usually like to do. I think right now is too early to do it because you got to see how camp goes, and major trades or major injuries can change stuff. But it's nice to have it lined up, right? But if you just can't wait, maybe you want to scramble and go hit a baseball game. Home run props are a really interesting one, like a home run prop parlay. I know is a popular move. Whatever it is, you can go to FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and you get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Moving along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast, we're talking about Netflix's quarterback series today. Not because it featured any Vikings, which for the first season, the Netflix docu-series about the NFL did not feature a Viking. It had Kirk Cousins' its first year, and then Justin Jefferson's second year, now Kirk Cousins the Falcon. But the first time the Vikings do show up in this, it's as the opponent to Kirk Cousins' Falcons. There was a lot made of the sort of homecoming to Kirk Cousins. What's going to happen at the time? The way people wrote about it, what is it going to be? Bitter? Is he going to be booed? What's going to happen? And there is some kind of fun, jokey joke between Kirk Cousins and his wife Julie about I wonder if I'm going to get booed today. And he expected to get booed. The first time you come out, you get booed because you're just the opponent, right? And especially if you're a former Viking. But you're going to do that. Or you're going to get the Jimmy Butler treat. Right? Where he gets booed every time he has the ball throughout that entire series against Golden State. And it was pretty clearly the former. But what I thought was interesting was so Kirk Cousins' whole arc throughout the Netflix quarterback series is about this sort of one step forward, 2 steps back that his season was, where he would get a little bit healthier on his ankle, and then he would hit his shoulder, and he would be and that would hold him back, and he would figure out a rhythm early in the season, and then he'd start throwing the turnovers, and he wouldn't get it back, and eventually it culminates in his benching, which is this pretty emotional moment. I thought they did a really good job capturing the emotional journey of an older quarterback coming to terms with the fact that he can't do what he used to do. And he even has a moment of discussing this where he's talking about it in terms of injury, but it's very much the thing that happens to older quarterbacks just by wear and tear, where you can't quite fit the window you used to be able to fit. And now you have to recalibrate your decision making on how risk averse you're going to be. And sort of change your whole paradigm about the game. And if you don't, you will flame out and, kind of never be the same guy again. And if you do, you can have these awesome golden years like somebody like Tom Brady had, right? I found myself pretty compelled by that. I found myself very compelled, by the way, by the Joe Burrow part of the whole thing. We won't talk about it on this show, but go watch it. It's truly a Greek tragedy of all of it's just a series of unfortunate events. And by the end of it, you just feel for him. At least I did. I don't know. Maybe not if you're a Ravens fan, but with Cousins and his return to Minnesota, it is very much more focused on the emotion of returning home. And the sort of device that it frames around, and this is because Kirk's talking about this in like the talking head, is his kids. He had his first kid was like an infant when he first came to Minnesota. And he had another kid during his time in Minnesota, I believe. Sorry if I'm wrong about that. And so that is like this formative place in the history of the Cousins family. And there is this really striking moment. It's just warm-ups where he's just kind of throwing back and forth. And his wife is there and his kids are there and they've got their VIP sideline passes. And they're, people. They're kids. They're running around. They're talking. They're people. They've grown up a little bit and are starting to, to walk into their next phase of life. And you think about just how much has changed for him in 6 years as a father, forgetting football entirely, just how much your life changes from having, you're like a potato in diapers to a kid. And that's where he starts to feel really emotional. This almost nostalgia of look how much further along the timeline we are. It's like the same emotion that you get when you like look back at something and realize how many years ago it was, and you go, oh my God, it's been so long. And then the greetings start, right? So pregame warm-up, CJ Ham comes and like comes and like taps from behind, and it's really cute. And, he's talking to all these people. And as it sort of goes into the game itself, it feels almost like they barely wanted to cover the game. Yeah, the Falcons start out that game and they are doing okay. And it was 21-21 at one point. And then things fall apart and they end up losing 42-21, right? And there's a couple of turnovers, and that's sort of in service of the grander Kirk Cousins narrative of the whole thing. And then, but they like kind of speed through it. And then when it's over, he's really disappointed. Kirk Cousins was really like frustrated at the end. Of course you were, right? Like he threw those 2 interceptions at the end of the fourth quarter, and we know how much Kirk Cousins beats himself up. And then he has to go out and like greet all these people that are pretty excited to see him. And there's kind of these two conflicting, I love how they set it up and how they put it together. I think it's really good documentary filmmaking. Which I'm probably more qualified to talk about than football, to be honest. But I have a film degree, okay? I'm using it finally, Dad. But they've found a way to kind of set up two conflicting emotions and then just like let you sit in it, where one emotion is this sort of bittersweet nostalgia of coming home and seeing Kevin O'Connell again and seeing Justin Jefferson again. And this like sequence of everybody coming up to him and saying hi. He sees Jordan Addison again, and he sees, Harrison Smith again, and a security dude and the trainer, and like all these people that he used, like all the way from, known people that we know as Vikings fans, just people who worked around the building that he had a relationship with privately. And they all want to come up and say hi to him. And there's this sort of nostalgia, this bittersweet, and you're like, oh, it's nice that everybody's like friends, right? We have to remember that this is a business of humans and not a business of, rabid fans, and that there's a difference in the temperament of a rabid fan and like the people actually doing the thing who have relationships with people. They made friends at your old job, right? And you're going by and hugging everybody. It's really cute. But then remembering that through that whole thing, he's pissed off because he lost, because he didn't play well up to his own standards. And he's like trying not to be visibly bitter at people who are excited to see him, because it's a polite thing to do. And there's this like tortured irony to it that really struck me, I guess. The emotional return to Minnesota was, I think, kind of hard, and not in a way that like you would make a big headline about, not in a way that like, oh, he was bitter. It's not that like I wouldn't call it a revenge game at all. That's the way we covered it going into the game. But like to call that experience a revenge game or a failed revenge game would be pretty naive, I think, because it was something a lot deeper than that. It was the torture of nostalgia. and this really difficult experience. But it wasn't all negative either. Like, there was a lot of really happy, cherished memory that comes flooding back. You know, he said the second he like walked into the bus stop or the bus station that like they picked him up at when he first flew in to sign the contract in 2018. And then he starts thinking about that. And then he starts thinking about, you know, what was going on when his son was born. And then he started thinking about, you know, the house they lived in where he took his first steps. And then it's like all these memories of the last 6 years of his life and early parenthood flood back. And there's this like really sweet emotion to it. And I think the documentary did a really good job to let that play out. And sort of the game was like took a back seat. And I think that was appropriate. All of that has very little to do with the 2025 Minnesota Vikings, right? I mean, it gives you a sense of their long-term outlook on the team, but I don't think it tells you anything you didn't already know about that. But the biggest problem facing the Minnesota Vikings in 2025, you could argue, is the Detroit Lions. And the Detroit Lions were also heavily featured in this docuseries in a way where we can... I mean, they were careful enough to cut around things that would be, you know, divulging information, but we can still at least get a sense for what the arena will be like when the Vikings and Lions meet again, and the Vikings try to take a win off of them for the first time in 6 games. That'll be now on Locked On Vikings. The Vikings have struggled with the Detroit Lions, and nobody is going to mince words about that. And nobody is, they haven't beaten the Lions since week 3 of 2022. The big matchup that's coming up, and this is the one that I centered a lot of my coverage around the last 2 Lions games about Brian Flores and Ben Johnson, and the sort of chess match there. Well, Brian Flores is going to see Ben Johnson twice in a row, and we'll see how that goes. But Brian Flores is also going to see Jared Goff twice in a row. And the formidable opponent that Jared Goff has become for the Vikings is very much on display, like what the problem is and why it's a problem. This is mostly in the second matchup. The first matchup, they kind of speed rush through, that they're focusing on other things at the time. They do show it, but the second matchup gets its own moment in the spotlight because it was such a big game, right? It was 2 14-2 teams, you know, 1 seed on the line versus a wild card and a bye. Like, you know, it was seen as this, like it was sold the way it was sold to us, and I think appropriately so when it was happening, which is that this was functionally a playoff game that they went and won. And the narrative of the game, I mean, go watch it if you don't want to get spoiled about all this. I don't know what spoilers you could have about a documentary about a football season that you know how it ends. But the narrative of the game from Jared Goff's perspective, the preparation, talks a lot about Brian Flores and the challenges that he presents, right? And they mentioned it a little bit before the first game, but the second game, they really dive in on how Jared Goff views the matchup. And I found it super fascinating to hear him talk candidly about what he thinks of the Minnesota Vikings. And the way he described it is as a cat and mouse game. It's pretty, I mean, it's nothing that you haven't heard on a broadcast. Brian Flores loves to line a lot of people up on the line of scrimmage. Sometimes he blitzes, sometimes he backs off. What are you going to do, right? What they want you to do is check into your blitz beater, and then he's going to back into a zone that's really good against that blitz beater, and you're going to get 2 yards, right? You're going to make you throw short, and then a zone defender's going to come up and tackle. So what do, right? So what they had to find was something they could check into that beats both the blitz and the version where they drop back in coverage. They had to find those plays that they can check into, and that was their thing. And you know, kind of find your solutions, but it's also they had to play the cat and mouse game. You can't always do that. You can't always have something that a play call that's good against two extraordinarily different defensive play calls. So you have to play the cat and mouse game. You have to figure out, are they coming or aren't they? Is there a tell? Can we figure it out? Can we just kind of go by feel of the game and get a sense for what they're doing? So the game begins, and if you remember much about that game, it started out pretty good for the Vikings defense. The Vikings defense started out on a really nice note. They got a sack right off the bat. They had that, I think it was it Ivan Pace pick up a fumble? They had like some pretty good stuff right away. And it was, you know, the sad music plays, the like sort of angry music plays, the doom, like Sam Spence. And it was played as this, like, all this preparation didn't happen and this cat and mouse game is really hard and they're not going to make it. And then there's this like turning point where Jared Goff like gets his mind right and then they kind of figure it out. It was presented as a code that they found a way to crack on the fly over the course of the game. I don't know that I agree with that assessment, and the documentary is telling a story. I don't think a documentary's main purpose, this is a hot take that I have about documentary filmmaking, and again, qualified for this, okay? So deal with it. But my hot take about documentary filmmaking is that its primary purpose is to be a narrative, and its secondary purpose is to be informational. It's still trying to tell you a story, and I think that if a documentary sacrifices information to tell that story better, I'm okay with that. I don't think a documentary should be seen as news. And I think as consumers, you should be wary of that. The documentary filmmakers do that all the time, that they will prioritize the story over the information. If you want real information about it, you should find like news reporters, people that don't care at all about, or in theory, they shouldn't care at all about, like crafting a holistic and satisfying narrative, right? So I think the way that they told the story of this game, I thought was pretty good. But my opinion of that game is that the Vikings kind of lost on Tuesday or Wednesday, right? Like they lost in decisions they made throughout the week and kind of showed up a little bit too unprepared. That wouldn't have been very good for the documentary. So I definitely sympathize with why they would do it that way. But to present it as like this code to crack, and then like combining that with the attitude that Jared Goff has toward this about playing the cat and mouse game and being confident enough to play the cat and mouse game. He has now rattled off 5 wins in a row, and he has and 4 of those were against Brian Flores and where they produced really well. So it's a code that he's really comfortable going after. And there's a lot of like talk about how they really wanted the Vikings to come blitz a lot. They wanted the Vikings to come at him, and because they knew that they could hit him over the top. There's these conversations between Jared Goff and Ben Johnson that are like, yeah, if they come, we're going to smoke them. Oh God. It's like, they're like begging. They're, please blitz me. Please blitz. Oh, we want to get that blitz so we can hit him over the top. And then sure enough, cut to send 7 guys and then hit Amon-Ra St. Brown for a big player, Jameson Williams for a huge play. And all that is to say, Flores' defense works on the assumption that you can blitz at volume without getting punished at volume. And the Lions found a way to punish at volume, right? So that's why they haven't been able to beat him. But like the Brian Flores defense is not a good structure if you blitz 5 times in a game. It just isn't. To blitz 5 times in a game, you would have to essentially be looking at the opposing quarterback and saying that like, we think our coverages are just so good against you that we're not going to do it. Or if it's like a particularly good blitz beating quarterback, then they won't do it. If you had like old school Aaron Rodgers, right, you wouldn't do that necessarily as much. It happened a lot with Mike Zimmer, but with Flores, it's not even about that so much, because it's about like, pressure at volume, where you may beat our blitz once, but on the 10th one, you're going to make a backbreaking mistake that ruins that drive. And so they have to find like consistent answers, and they've always been able to find consistent answers. But they did say that like in the first quarter of that game that the Vikings brought stuff that the Lions were not familiar with, were not ready for, and it like got them a little bit right off the bat. So all you have to do now, you've found a way to game plan in a way that can throw the Lions off of their rhythm. Whether that this applies to the Bears or the Lions now depends on how much responsibility you assign to Ben Johnson for that dominance. But either way, it's going to come up twice in a year, right? So you can throw him off now at the beginning, and now it's about being able to correctly adjust in the middle of the game, which is a much harder thing. I don't really see the Vikings as a team that like struggles to be willing to adjust and try new things over the course of a game, but you have to find the right answers over the course of a game, which is easier said than done. You can be willing to, and yeah, sometimes people aren't, and that's a problem, but that's not where we are. It's that we will try a new thing, but the new thing also won't work, right? We go to man coverage. Well, now our corners get beat, right? We'll go, we'll stop blitzing or whatever. Now they're carving up our zone. Okay, well, we'll send everybody. Okay, their blitz beaters are working now. And you have to find the thing to go to that isn't going to work. You have to find the moments where, yeah, we will go to man coverage because our corners can take these guys. Or we will just, keep blitzing because we know that this quarterback's going to crack under a bunch of pressure. 10-year, 11-year vet Jared Goff maybe isn't that guy, but 2-year, second-year players like Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams maybe are going to be that guy. And both those guys are, on the schedule this year. So either way, it sort of recontextualizes the Lions' perspective on that matchup, that it is one that they really see as like a puzzle to solve. And once they have solved that puzzle, they were able to be pretty free and clear. And is the answer to make that puzzle harder to solve or to make that puzzle less valuable to solve? That is a difficult philosophical question that is not really for me to answer or try to answer. But that's, I think, the nature of the problem that Brian Flores is going to be grappling with headed into looking for his first win as a Viking against the Detroit Lions here in his third year. Like, it's a big problem. I will talk to you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.